Good evening, everybody. My name is Joaquin Torres, and I'm your elected assessor recorder. So everything we're valuing is of specific concern right now because of where the economy is, as all of you know, both commercial properties and residential properties. So what I want to talk about today is what some of the priorities are in regards to that economic context, some of the general work and outreach that we're doing that complements what's happening this evening, making sure that you see a name and a face to the office, so it's not just that damn envelope that you received. I'll talk about Proposition 19 and then some key dates that you want to be consistently aware of in relationship to our office. It's my favorite slide. This is not guidance, it's just information. For anything in particular, you want to make sure that you're working with your attorney or your financial planner to make sure that you understand exactly the particulars of how the law pertains to your very unique situation or how the law pertains to your client's very unique situation, which is why it's always great for them to get on the phone with our staff first and reach out to us. I'll provide that information at the very end and make sure that's emailed out to your group so that people can get that basic level of information that can be quite deep at first and then take those next steps. Next slide, please. So essentially, what Prop 13 did was control the rate at which your assessed value would increase year over year and cap that at no more than 2% or at the California Consumer Price Index level, which may be lower, but nothing above 2%. So you have a home, $500,000 that you buy many, many years ago, and what your taxes are going to be based on in terms of your obligation is how that base year value, that $500,000, will grow over time. Which means the next year it'll just grow by no more than 2%. The next year after that by no more than 2%. Most recently, you saw an opportunity that doesn't come up very often where it was less than 2%. People were furious when they found out that it increased again this year, given everything that they were reading. The California Consumer Price Index in the previous year was over 7%, but because of Prop 13, that stabilized at no more than 2% per year. For seniors, however, it still matters, because it's an obligation and a growth that they can't account for because their Social Security isn't increasing by 2% every single year. So it's still an issue. The value of exemptions that people are given as a homeowner has stayed at a static level for years. $7,000 of assessed value that's taken off that assessed value, which equates to around $80. I'm not gonna say no to $80, but it's not substantive when it comes to the issues that people are facing financially up and down the state of California. Next slide, please. The assessed value, fair market value at the time of ownership. And as I was mentioning, here's a more specific example. So the blue line that you see here is that assessed value if that same home was on the market and it was reassessed based on a change in ownership, or a portion of it was reassessed based on improvements that are substantive in nature. You're not seeing that based on improvements jump to market value, but a change in ownership you are. So those items I was talking about before that might be a 20 to 30% increase in our responsibilities of enrolling value is connected to some of this changes. So a change in ownership for that same family as they go year over year over year from that 100K in 1990, really pissed off that they had that chance to do that, especially if they had that 3% down payment option. In 2024, they're only paying taxes based on $196,000. That again will grow the next year by no more than 2%. But if they sell the home, the new property owners are going to see that market rate value, let's say, for example, jump up to 1.2 million. Pretty significant delta there in terms of what their property tax obligations are going to be. Next slide, please. As I was mentioning, that reassessment to market value based on that change in ownership that would take place. So what Proposition 19 did, and again, I'll have some editorial content here as well from my perspective, but objectively, it changed the nature of what opportunities were able to be garnered by a property owner based on how they wanted their beneficiary to receive their property, usually a child, a grandchild. And what Proposition 19 did was provide some restrictions on that and also provided some expansions of those benefits. Now this is where I'm going to get editorial. The leverage that was provided in terms of getting this passed, and remember the context in which this was passed. Does anybody remember the November 2020 ballot in relationship to this item? Not many people do, but those who did remember that maybe 2 months before the ballots were needed to be submitted, it was smoky, but the sky had turned orange. And again, I'm editorializing here. At the top of the ballot, it said, for seniors 55 years of age or older, for those who were permanently disabled, or those who were impacted by a natural disaster, they could get some relief through a base year value transfer that would suddenly change. What wasn't shared, and what no one really knew, was that right underneath that, there was another provision that changed the nature in which intergenerational transfers would qualify for an exclusion, and what restrictions were applied to that as well. What you see here is for the base year value transfer, which I'll talk about first. Objectively, most people say that was a good thing. In the political environment, the rumblings are not about this part of Proposition 19, they are about the secondary part. But for here, just like the basics. I'm a senior, or I qualify as permanently disabled, or I've been impacted by a natural disaster. I need to move to a new home, or I just want to move someplace else, be closer to my family. I can't do an apples to apples switch. Are there any benefits that might be out there? According to Prop 19 in this base year value transfer change, yes, there is. And not only are you not limited to, say, less than 10 counties that you can move to, but now you can move to any of the 58 counties in California and carry your base year value with you. You can take that, say you had that $250,000 worth of property, you qualify under Prop 19, you can move anywhere in the state of California. However, based on the market value of the home, any value in the replacement property that's above that amount, that delta would need to be added to, say, that $250,000 assessed value of the property. So yes, you have the ability to move anywhere you want in California. Yes, you can use that base year value, that factor base year value of that 2%, no more than 2% over time. You can move anywhere you want in California. There's no restriction there, but there is going to be that hitch of you have to cover the delta as well. That will be added to your factor base year value. That will then increase by no more than 2% year over year, but that is an increase in your property tax obligations ultimately, but you do receive that benefit. So as you can see here in the bullet points, you can transfer that to a new replacement home. There's no cap on the value of the replacement home. You can do that anywhere in California. You can do that 3 times, and then no limit to the market value of that replacement property, but you do have to cover that delta. Replacement home must be purchased or newly constructed in the case of you losing your home and you need to construct a new one exactly where you are within 2 years of the sale of the original property or that moment of destruction. Homeowners must occupy the original property and replacement dwelling as their principal residence. So I live in here, this is where I vote, this is where my utility bills come. It's got to be that 1-for-1 in terms of your principal place of residence. That will be a theme that covers the next item as well. And then of course the criteria, the basic ones that I mentioned. Next slide, please. The filing obligations, the paperwork that must be done, the associated timelines in which that paperwork must be filed by the homeowner, and making sure that everyone understands that irrespective of the law and the rules, it isn't static. It requires that homeowner initiative and follow through based on paperwork that must be filed and also the timeline in which it must be done. And of course, always, always, always ask our office if there's any questions, because the last thing we want to see is someone missing that timeline. Even though there's prospective relief for it to be adjusted, there's still a cost to that. And I just don't want to see that happen to people. So in this example, you have a new replacement home that was purchased on April 5th of 2021 at 1.5 million. The original property that sold for 1.2 million. The original property's factored base year value that includes those 2% increases year over year, 250. What's the delta between those two? In addition to say that you file for everything, you do it on time, there's that $300,000 delta. So instead of you being responsible for property taxes based on this number, it's based on what? 550, right? So that's exactly what happens in this case. That $300,000 excess is added to your factored base year value. So that's just the hitch that I was talking about earlier. You must be age 55 or older when you sell your original primary residence to qualify. You may purchase the replacement before you're 55, but you must be age 55 or older when you sell that primary place of residence. So again, the particulars really matter. You just got to go over it again and again to make sure that you're crossing all of your T's and dotting all of your I's. Next slide, please. How long do you have to buy that replacement property after you sell that original property? In this example, 2 years to purchase a replacement property that you're going to use as that, again, primary residence. A couple divorces. As part of the divorce, their principal residence is sold. Well, do each of us get to take advantage of this benefit? No. In addition to a divorce, you have to have that conversation. Who is going to benefit? Only the claimant may transfer the original property's base year value. If they both qualify, they must mutually decide who will get the benefit. Can I have my child on title with me? Yes. If you and your child purchase a property together from a third party? Yes. There is no requirement that the claimant be the sole owner of either the original primary residence or the replacement primary residence. Again, we have some checklists here as well, some basic checklists. Again, you want to be able to do that due diligence here in terms of the forms that you have to file, the deadlines associated with them, and the name of those forms. And again, you can always reach out to our office to make sure that you have this checklist in front of you and you know what you need to do. Prop 19, intergenerational transfers. So, a family home is excluded from reassessment to market value. These are the basics, and it gets more controversial as we go into details. From reassessment to market value when it's transferred between a parent or a child or a grandparent to a grandchild. The family home is what qualifies. All other real property does not qualify. Any individual who's been building up over time, again, I'm editorializing right now, building up over time, buying multiple properties, thinking that they're going to be able to give this benefit to their beneficiaries, their children or their grandchildren. Suddenly that is no longer the case. 2 months after the sky turns orange is when that comes before you to vote on. A few more months after that, February 16th of the following year, December, January, and then 2 more weeks, that changes. So we saw thousands of applications move forward for those who knew that this change had happened and understood what it meant. And on top of that, again, I'm editorializing here beyond the basic, the amount of the exclusion is capped at $1 million plus the base year value. I have that say that I'll use $500,000 this time. That's my factored base year value. Before I have to add any delta, if the replacement property is, say, at that point, $1.5 million or less, I'm still working with that $500,000 number. But if it's over that, 1.6, let's say, then I'm adding $100,000 to that 500K. And that's gonna be the basis for my property taxes. If I have 4 more properties, all of those other 4 are going up to fair market value. So that $100,000 purchase property in 1990 that we saw earlier, that was represented by that blue line, suddenly that's going up to the red line of 1.2 million across 4 properties, changes in nature of what those properties are going to be used for and what the benefits are going to be for those families and what the requirements are going to have to be for them when they have to think about their property tax obligations. Here are some of the basics: definition of child, born of the parent, a stepchild while the relationship exists, an in-law child while the relationship exists, adopted child, foster child. The family home, as I was mentioning, it must be that principal place of residence prior to the date of transfer, and the transferee has to move into that residence within 1 year and use it as their primary place of residence, which means they're filing that homeowner's exemption that I was talking about earlier, making sure that that's filed, and it must be continually used as a family home in order to benefit from that. Eligible for the homeowners or disabled veterans exemption, yes, right? This is a form that people have to file to make sure that you're verifying that this is your primary place of residence. This is the multi-unit dwelling. In this example, it's a 4-unit building, and the same rule would apply. There's an exception for ADUs. ADUs, along with the primary residence, qualify as a family home principal residence based on the use. So like a family home has an ADU in the back, the very specific nature of that, but for an apartment building that might be used for income generating purposes, that might be different. So again, those particulars really work through those issues. Next slide, please. Here are the filing requirements. I won't go too much into the details here, but essentially your exemption claim that homeowners or disabled veterans, filing that you have to do, the filing period within 1 year. There are people that have missed that, and I'll get into what options they have available to them. The transferee must own or occupy to be eligible. The exclusion claim form that must be filed within 3 years of transfer, so 1 year, 3 year, you gotta do both. Within 3 years of transfer, before the transfer to a third party, whichever is first, and then additional information that you wanna pay attention to. If all the deadlines have passed, say you miss it that first year, then yes, your property goes up to the market rate value for that time period. You have time to catch up to that, file it for the next year. There's no retroactive relief. So you've got to pay attention to those deadlines and the filing forms. Once you do them and say you correct it, so say you're going from that 500K, you're suddenly bumped up to 1.2 for that year, you're responsible for that 700K assessed value delta that will have an impact on your property tax obligation. The future year you can have that corrected. Once you move through all of these items, that is the law. That is the law. Parent transfers the principal residence to the child on March 1st of 2021. The child claims the property as their principal residence and files the homeowner's exemption on February 1st of the following year. The reassessment exclusion form that's also mentioned there, that's also filed on the 1st of February. They're both timely filed. You're all good. Here's an example of a late filing. The parent passes away, and remembering that passing away, that's when the timer starts. The parent passes away on June 15th of 2021. There's an estate plan, luckily, in place that leaves a family home to the child. The child files the homeowner's exemption form on the following year. However, in August of the following year of 2022, they file the exclusion claim form earlier for some reason in this example. The exclusion claim is timely filed. The homeowner's claim is not. You're eligible only for prospective relief. So again, the details. So in this example, reassess to market value. There's a supplemental assessment for that period of that fiscal year. Perspective of relief, that exclusion applies as the following year lien date for the following fiscal year. Next slide, please. So value cap is a sum of $1 million plus the existing factored base year value. Any excess market value that's added. So here's that example right here. The factored base year value is $800K. The market value of the home at the time of occupancy, 1.6. You see the value cap is a sum of 1 million plus that factor base year value. You're 200K under, you're good. No adjustment to the factor base year value. Going back to the previous question, well, do I get a discount on that? No, you don't. You're already receiving the benefit based on that 2% cap that's been there year over year in terms of how you've increased, but much below market rate value. Here's an example when that isn't the case, a new taxable value. Parents transfer their home to the child on April 3rd of 2021. They do everything on time. They file both forms. The factored base value of that home is 400K, but the market value is 1.6 million. 400 plus the 1 million is 1.4. You got that delta in terms of being over by 200K. That 200K is going to be added to your factored base year value. So now your property tax obligation is based not on 400K, but on that 600K. And that's the new taxable value. That's your new factor base year value, which will increase by no more than 2% year over year. So it just happens at one time. Next slide, please. My mother's trust leaves her home to me and my 2 siblings equally. Will this property be subject to reassessment as of our mother's passing? For the property to be excluded from reassessment under Prop-19, at least one of the children or qualified heirs must occupy that family home within 1 year. So again, the basics are always what's important to pay attention to. There's so many people that are asking around workarounds. It's really simple. It is straight up and hard. Both the homeowner's exemption and Prop-19 exclusion claim, they have to be filed on time to qualify for the exclusion from reassessment as of that, in this case, date of death. That's when the timer starts. LLC, family home. So here's another question like that. Hey, I've heard that parents can set up an LLC with their children and put the house into the LLC. I love the creative thinking. Since ownership doesn't change on the death of the parents, the property isn't reassessed, right? Is this correct? LLCs are not always an automatic avoidance of reassessment. California property tax laws governing legal entity ownerships, transfers, they're complex, and you should be discussing them with your real estate planning attorney, your financial advisor. Here's an example of where a reassessment would occur despite a property, as one example of where a reassessment would occur despite a property being in an LLC, is a situation where there's a change in control in which one member gains greater than 50% interest, and suddenly that triggers 100% reassessment. What if a child moves out? If another eligible transferee, a sibling, moves into the property within 1 year of the other one moving out, and timely files for the homeowner's exemption form within that 1 year of occupancy, then that exclusion continues. If no other eligible transferee moves into the property within that 1 year, then the exclusion is removed. There's going to be a question of enforcement there. There's going to be a question of follow-up there. But remember that there is that timeline in which we can capture back value according to the law, or rather must. So again, it's not flexible, it's not discretionary, it's the law. So these are the choices that people have to make around here's where the law exists, it is their obligation, and it's your personal financial decisions that you're making here, but the law is, that is what we have to capture. The property is then reassessed to the fair market value as of the time of a transfer. So again, timeline, forms, the checklist, and just the follow-up, and calling and connecting with our office. I know it's really a beat part of the conversation, but it's why I like to come out and share with everyone so everyone's aware. So in case that question comes up, like I remember the assessor came out and he said this really horrible thing to me. Maybe I should share that with my client. Please do, or if you want to refer them to me, I'm happy to do that too, because I'd rather have them be prepared and know what's coming than not. Next slide, please. $1 million, just a reminder, is just an easy way to capture that value. There is a bit of an adjustment there. So for the period of beginning this year, it's a little over that, 1.022 million. You'll see another adjustment happen in 2025. So as I was mentioning before, will there be a repeal? This doesn't seem fair. My clients are gonna be pissed. In order for this amendment to be made around Prop-19 and this very specific provision, it requires one of the two. A proposed amendment by the state legislature with 2/3 of the vote from the Senate and the Assembly, or a citizen's initiative with valid signatures of registered voters equal to 8% of the number of votes cast for the governor in the last election. Most recently, there was this signature gathering effort. It failed. It just happened this past month and it wasn't successful. And that was certified that it failed earlier this month. So the state legislature also has not picked this up in the same way that it hasn't picked up additional changes to disabled veterans exemption amounts being increased, in the same way that it hasn't picked up homeowners exemption amounts. Neither are the signatures. For your resources, you can always come to our website. We have great information there, which will also direct you to these, the Board of Equalization. You can always go to them for their FAQs and guidance. And then we also have ours at our sfassessor.org website. Here are some low-cost legal resources that we refer people to. Here are those key dates that I was talking about. So the lien date on which the value is assessed is always based on January 1st. The exemptions deadline, make sure you're filing for those exemptions, February 15th. Remember I talked about the significant increase in appeals that we're dealing with, the 20 to 30% increase in workload production. That requires us to be less flexible and less lenient in terms of how we're structuring our ability to answer phone calls and deal with people separate from the formal appeals process for residential properties and some commercial properties, which really mean 4 units, apartment buildings or less, just because of the complexity there. The timeline in which you can receive an informal review around the value of the property that you want to contest separate and apart from the formal appeals process is by the end of this month, March 31st. So if anyone has that notice and they say, based on this, based on what I'm reading in the paper, based on what the parameters are, what the comps are on my property, I think I might be 5% less, 10% less, 15% less. If that's the case, fill out the paperwork, submit it to us. It is going to, it is something that we want to make sure that we're being attentive to. We're seeking to be proactive about those changes where it makes sense. The roll close that I was talking about, we have until June 30th to get all of the value on the roll. Then, I know this is your favorite part, the notice of assessed value. This is not a bill. That comes out in July. Then the evil tax collector, his name is Jose Cisneros. His tax bill arrives in October with the due dates in December and April. Just reminding everybody, pay the bill. Because if you don't, you are subject to penalties and fines. If you pay the bill and there's a correction, you get a refund plus interest. This is personal property and possessory interest, like I was talking about earlier. Say it's government property that someone has a business interest in. Those bills are coming out in July and August. Those are due. So just a different timeline, different calendar for them. And then for anyone who needs help, come on by City Hall. We're room 190, first door past security on your right. You can always call us or you can email us at assessor@sfgov.org. That's it.
Thank you.
Yeah, sorry. I know it's a lot.